Good evening, I'm Jim Lehrer. On the NewsHour tonight, some analysis of the big civil suit filed today against the tobacco industry by the Justice Department. A newsmaker interview with the President of Colombia, Andres Pastrana. A Y2K Ready update from Senators Bennett and Dodd. And a look at the Pat Buchanan story by political reporters Elizabeth Arnold, Ronald Brownstein, and Thomas Edsel. It all follows our summary of the news this Wednesday.
It took millions of years to create the world's oil supply and 150 years to deplete it. Who is helping to cut the world's need for oil with renewable energy sources?
This program is made possible in part by a grant from Travelers Insurance.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
The Justice Department announced a lawsuit against the tobacco industry today. It will attempt to recover the billions of dollars in taxpayer money spent treating sick smokers. The action alleges cigarette makers defrauded and misled the public for 45 years by concealing the harmful effects of smoking. Attorney General Reno spoke at a news conference in Washington.
Our goals in this lawsuit are simple. We want to recover health care expenditures paid out by the federal government to treat tobacco-related illnesses. We want to require the tobacco companies to disgorge the funds that they earn through their unlawful conduct. We want to require the tobacco companies once and for all to disclose all relevant research on smoking and health. And we want to engage in counter-advertising and other public education campaigns to better warn our young people about the dangers of smoking.
A lawyer for one of the companies, Philip Morris, said the suit was without substance and was politically motivated. He told reporters it was being pushed by the White House and was first mentioned by President Clinton last January.
If you look at the fact that the announcement of the filing was made in the State of the Union address, I think that speaks volumes about the political nature of this lawsuit. This was not a lawsuit that was just filed. This is a lawsuit that has been trumpeted. This is a lawsuit that I think you will continue to see the administration and the Justice Department try in the press. They will try to use soundbite litigation to persuade people that they have a legitimate lawsuit when in fact they have a lawsuit that has no basis in fact and no basis in law.
The civil action followed a criminal inquiry closed today into testimony by tobacco executives in 1997. They told Congress then they believed smoking was not addictive. No charges were filed. We'll have more on today's announcement right after this news summary. Major U.S. computer systems are ready for the new century, according to the final Senate Y2K report released today. But locally, glitches might occur, and sometimes those failures will be significant. Senators Robert Bennett and Christopher Dodd reached the conclusions after conducting 30 public hearings on the matter. We'll talk with them later in the program tonight. The Senate approved a new agency today to oversee the security of the nation's nuclear weapons laboratories. It was in response to allegations of Chinese espionage. The semi-autonomous agency will be within the Energy Department. The House adopted similar legislation last week. In Taiwan today, strong aftershocks complicated earthquake recovery efforts. Rescue workers scrambled to safety, then returned to collapsed structures. They dug through rubble in a race to find more victims before more time passed. Helicopters ferried them to crowded medical facilities or to makeshift mortuaries. Officials said the death toll from yesterday's quake climbed to 2,000, with more than 4,000 people injured, some 2,600 missing. Earlier, emergency crews from Virginia and Florida arrived in Taipei to join the search for victims. It was another unsettling day in East Timor as troops from a multinational force tried to extend their control. We have a report from Mark Austin of Independent Television News.
The desperate people of Dili are resorting to desperate means. A humanitarian supplies warehouse the scene today of frenzied looting. There are simply not enough UN peacekeepers here to keep order, and departing Indonesian troops have no incentive to stop it, so instead they take part. In Dili, it is not the looters, but the militiamen the multinational force has in its sights. Several more were arrested today, and in the port area, enraged locals violently handed over one suspect to the troops. But on the outskirts of this city and further afield, the militias and renegade Indonesian troops remain armed and out of control, attacking foreigners for the first time since the multinational force arrived. The force commander visited the village where Financial Times journalist Sander Turnus was shot dead by men in Indonesian army uniform. As another British journalist was also attacked by similarly dressed men in the same area. He escaped, hid in the woods, and had to be rescued by special forces in a Black Hawk helicopter.
Thank you for your professionalism.
Many Indonesian troops are leaving East Timor. Today, one contingent handed over control of the UN compound here to British Army Gurkhas. These soldiers are leaving with good grace, but others who resent the presence of the multinational force in their country are not. They are burning their barracks and compounds before they leave.
And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now it's on to the tobacco suit, the President of Colombia, a Y2K computer update, and the Buchanan run. Elizabeth Farnsworth has the tobacco story.
President Clinton spoke briefly about the tobacco lawsuit late today at the White House.
Last January, in my State of the Union address, I announced that the Justice Department was preparing a litigation plan to recover the cost of smoking-related illnesses. Over the years, smoking-related illnesses have cost taxpayers billions of dollars through Medicare, Veterans Health, and other federal health programs. Today, the Justice Department declared that the United States is in fact filing suit against the major tobacco companies to recover the costs borne by taxpayers. I believe it's the right thing to do. The tobacco companies should answer to the taxpayers for their actions. The taxpayers of our country should have their day in court. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, the tobacco companies say this lawsuit is pure politics, sir. What do you say?
Well, if you look at the record of this administration, we've been out there on this issue a very long time. No one else ever tried to do that. We did our best to work with them and with the Congress to resolve many of these matters legislatively, and they declined. And I believe this is the appropriate thing to do.
And here to discuss the suit and its potential impact are Mary Aronson, head of a tobacco policy and litigation research firm in Washington, and Martin Feldman, a tobacco analyst with the Wall Street firm Solomon Smith Barney. Mary Aronson, tell us more about what the government is claiming and what it's asking in this suit.
The government is asking primarily for repayment of medical expenditures under a variety of federal programs, including Medicare, various Department of Defense programs, federal employees' health benefits programs, and the like, and a disgorgement of ill-gotten gains by the industry for possibly as long as the past 45 years. I believe there was some discussion of that today. It's bringing its case under three important statutes: the Medical Care Recovery Act, which was initially established in 1962 to help the government sue for, primarily I think then for military people who had been injured and for which the government had to foot the bill, under a civil RICO claim and under the Medicare Secondary Payer Act.
Martin Feldman, anything first to add on the claims and the demands?
Well, just one quick point. The government is also claiming that the industry should reveal all the documents that it believes have not yet been made public, and also fund anti-smoking campaigns, right, which we've clearly seen the states do exactly the same thing. So much of those two aspects of the claim have in fact been satisfied, I think, as a result of the state settlement of last year.
Martin Feldman, how do you see the legal basis for this? And just briefly say what RICO is.
RICO came out of a different type of litigation a long time ago, but it's racketeering, and that the claim here is, or the allegation is, that the industry conspired to act together to withhold information from the American people on the dangers of smoking. I think the real problem is that in 1964 the Surgeon General published his report saying very clearly, smoking will kill you. Government went on until 1974 handing out free cigarettes to the military, subsidizing the growth of tobacco leaf, debating whether or not to raise tobacco taxes. So it's slightly disingenuous, I think, the attempt to bring this claim, given the way it's acted as a partner for the industry over all these years, a tacit partner at that.
Mary Aronson, disingenuous?
Well, you know, maybe the government had some sense that smoking was dangerous. Maybe it had a lot of information about the dangers of smoking. But who had the best information? Who had the most complete information? And I think that was clearly the industry. And the industry, according to the claims made today, withheld that information, made promises to make it public, made promises to do research, and according to the complaint made today, did just the opposite.
Ms. Aronson, how big a threat is this to the tobacco companies compared, for example, to the various suits they faced before in the States, for example?
Yeah. Well, ever since I started looking at tobacco, one of the big threats was what was going to happen in Washington and what would happen in the courtroom. And, you know, 5 years ago, we started hearing all of this negative information about the industry, whistleblowers, documents coming forward, and the like. And as a result of that, I think a lot of attorneys felt free to litigate against the industry in what I call boutique cases, the state cases, the federal government case, third-party insurer cases, and the like. Certainly the federal case is the case of the hour. It's the biggest thing that's out there, and it really dwarfs the state cases. I believe it will dwarf, even though we haven't heard what the price tag is. But even if it is settled, and even after it is completed, I think we're still going to have the lingering threat of individual smokers going forward with their injuries, and the punitive damages that can be assessed. 2 cases earlier this year had punitives assessed at $50 million in one, and I think about $70, $80 million in the other. So I think there's still problems out there.
And Mr. Feldman, how do you see the threat to the tobacco companies?
Well, I see the biggest threat to the tobacco companies, agreeing with Mary, with the individual cases. After the Minnesota case was settled last year, the industry made public a lot of documents that clearly showed misconduct and tough behavior of the 50s and 60s, and I think that has rearmed a number of individual plaintiffs. I think on a case like this federal claim, the Health Care Recovery Act does not appear on its face to allow for an aggregation of the claims. So in other words, I think that the industry has some quite good technical defenses to keep the plaintiff out of court, and simply allow the plaintiff instead to seek compensation on a one plaintiff at a time basis. But the individual cases are out there. They could grow in number. I think the industry will win some and lose some. I think up to date, we've never seen any money paid out as a result of a loss. I think in years to come, that'll probably change. The industry can clearly afford some losses, but for me, that's the bigger threat than these cases, because on the individual cases, it's tough to keep the plaintiff out of court. Anyone has a right to bring a claim, and even the industry doesn't deny that.
And Mr. Feldman, just briefly, we heard what the argument of one attorney for Philip Morris was. What are they arguing about this? We heard the argument that this is a political case. What else will they be arguing? Well, again, to reiterate my previous comment, I think they will be arguing that the plaintiff has very little right to bring his claim in court. In other words, the Health Care Recovery Act doesn't allow for an aggregated claim. It doesn't, some of these claims don't allow for employees that perhaps were not federal employees of the government, and that's only at the initial stages. I think then if they fail on those grounds, they will fight it substantively, and they will argue that the federal government knew as much about the dangers of smoking as they did from the period 1953 to the late 70s, the period that perhaps represents most doubt. Mary Aronson, do you have anything to add to that about their argument?
Well, my sense, and something that Martin said, my sense is, in reading about the Medical Care Recovery Act, is that it doesn't prohibit aggregation. It's simply silent on aggregation.
Mm-hmm. And explain aggregation.
Grouping of cases.
Yeah, as opposed to individual cases.
Exactly.
Right.
And given that the Medical Care Recovery Act does provide an independent cause of action to the federal government, it would seem that aggregation is obviously the most efficient way for the federal government to go, and because it is an independent cause of action, you would think, I believe that the aggregation issue isn't all that clear as Martin would suggest it is.
And Ms. Aronson, the criminal investigation that had been underway was dropped today, as Jim Lehrer said earlier. Can any of the evidence gathered in that, in the grand jury, for example, be used in the Justice Department's case?
I think the Justice Department, the Civil Division, was going out of its way. I think there were reports a few weeks ago. They were going out of their way to hire FBI personnel who were completely divorced from the criminal investigation. And so I'm not exactly sure what that means in terms of, it doesn't sound like the evidence is going to be carried over. Maybe it will be discovered independently, but that's my sense.
Mr. Feldman, what's been the effect so far on tobacco stocks of this suit?
Well, when the President announced the claim on January 20th at his State of the Union address, the stocks fell sharply. Philip Morris, the biggest tobacco stock, probably gave up $6 on a $46, $47 price over the course of the subsequent 2 weeks. Today, the stocks were weak. Philip Morris down about $1.50, I believe, at the close, slightly more than the market today. So much of the bad news was already in the stock prices. From here, the market is obviously going to be nervous about this case. I think as the market begins to evaluate the risks, you might see the stocks recover from their current lows. But clearly, this does represent enormous uncertainty. There's a case in Miami called the Engel case, a class action, where the court has allowed an aggregated claim, obviously much smaller than this, but to go ahead, and that's worried investors as well. This represents a bigger form of the same claim. For me, the biggest worry is, however, the individual cases where I think the industry's defenses are perhaps less obvious than they might be in this federal claim or in the class action in Miami.
All right. Thank you both very much for being with us.
Thank you.
The country on the front line of America's drug war. We start with this report by Kwame Holman.
The South American country of Colombia produces 3/4 of the world's illicit cocaine and 2/3 of the heroin sold on the streets of the U.S. As part of its war on drugs, Washington this year tripled its anti-narcotics assistance to Colombia to $289 million. That makes Colombia the third largest recipient of U.S. military aid behind Israel and Egypt. In July, the American-backed drug war in Colombia exacted its first U.S. military casualties. An Army surveillance plane went down in remote southern Colombia, killing 5 U.S. soldiers. The crash added fuel to a partisan political debate in Washington over the U.S. role in Colombia's drug war. The White House drug czar, retired Army General Barry McCaffrey, was in Colombia in August and called the drug situation there an emergency. McCaffrey wants an additional $1 billion in U.S. military and civilian aid to go to Colombia and its neighbors over 3 years. And McCaffrey defended efforts by Colombia's president, Andres Pastrana, to reach a settlement with anti-government guerrillas. Colombia's civil war between the government and at least 3 competing guerrilla groups has resulted in some 30,000 deaths just in the last decade. An estimated 1.3 million people of Colombia's population of 40 million have left their homes because of the fighting. Many fled to neighboring countries. The economy also is suffering, with the peso losing 1/4 of its value versus the dollar this year. Unemployment is at 20%, and Colombia's current recession is said to be the worst in 70 years. McCaffrey acknowledged the government's talks with the rebels, known by their Spanish acronyms FARC and ELN, have been slow-moving.
There's been no gesture of goodwill on the part of the FARC guerrillas. It's outrageous. And yet, in saying that, I do not imply that we should do anything but be entirely supportive of continuing to engage on a negotiated, support Pastrana and his colleagues on a negotiated end of the FARC, ELN, and paramilitary struggle against the government.
On Capitol Hill, Republicans say Pastrana's peace overtures have failed to curb violence and that the Colombian president destabilized the situation further when he effectively gave a portion of land to the rebels. Today, the guerrillas control about half the territory in the country. Indiana Republican Dan Burton, chairman of the House Government Reform Committee, is a leading critic of the Pastrana government and U.S. policy.
It's unfortunate that it took the tragic deaths of 5 U.S. Army personnel in Colombia to enlighten this administration that there's a problem down there. A blind person could have seen there's a problem. If we haven't learned anything throughout history, we ought to learn this. Appeasement does not work.
Republicans also blasted the administration for failing to deliver state-of-the-art Black Hawk helicopters promised to Colombia to help it fight the drug growers. This week, President Pastrana is in the U.S. asking for more help. Speaking before the UN General Assembly and meeting with U.S. officials, he requested $3.5 billion in international assistance to fight the drug war.
And Colombia's President Andres Pastrana is with us now. Mr. President, welcome.
Thank you very much again.
How would you spend the $3.5 billion?
Roughly, I think the figures of this $3.5 billion, 55% are going to be invested in fighting drugs, in narco trafficking, and 45% in social investment, in education, alternative development, housing, infrastructure, and creating alternative development in the areas in which we have right now illicit crops.
How would this money make it possible? What would this money make possible for you to do that you're not doing now to fight the drug situation?
I think that we need to invest in our economy because we need to create back again the structure to put the economy back on the track of development, growth, employment. Avoid people going from the urban areas and the rural areas to cultivate coca or poppy fields. So I think that if we invest in them, in alternative development, in creating new jobs in the country, enhance the commerce between Colombia and the United States, we're going to get more jobs and we're going to get these people out of this illicit business.
Why do you believe it's the responsibility of the United States and other countries to help you?
Because this is a war that is not only of Colombia. This is a global problem. I will not stay only in the supply-demand.
Go ahead, that's fine.
Because we always been discussing, okay, there's a supply and a demand. But I think that we go a step forward. What's good and what's bad. And I think that it's bad to cultivate like as what is happening in Colombia, but it's bad also to consume as what is happening in the United States and in Europe. And that's why we are not asking aid. I think this is a strategic alliance between Colombia, the United States, Europe, Asia. This is the largest business in the world. It's $500 billion business.
$500 billion.
And that's why we need to unite all the countries of the world to eradicate drugs from the face of the earth. And this is not only our problem.
So when you talk to U.S. leaders, whether it's General McCaffrey or it's President Clinton or it's Secretary Albright or whoever, you say, hey, look, wait a minute. There is a supply problem, and we're working on that, but there's also a demand. You reduce the demand and help us reduce the supply. Do you think the U.S. is doing everything it can to reduce the demand?
They can do more. And I think that you could see in the public opinion of the United States that they want more investment also in avoiding consumption in the United States. And that's why I think we need to unite all the efforts, Colombia, the U.S., Europe, Asia, to fight this problem.
Now, Mr. President, I know just on this program for the last 20-plus years, we've been talking about talking to people about doing things about the drug problem, the drug trafficking, the drug growing in Colombia. And it seems to have gotten worse and worse and worse. What gives you any confidence that $3.5 billion or any other effort could finally stop it?
I think this is the starting point. I think that we've been fighting. For example, in Colombia, in the last 18 years, we've been in the front line against drugs. We have lost, as you've seen many times, I imagine, in this program, our best journalists, our best politicians, members of the army, killed. Even myself. I suffered personally the violence of drugs. I was kidnapped by the Cali and the Medellin cartel at the end of the 80s. But I think that we have the commitment and that we're wishing to fight and eradicate drugs from Colombia, from the U.S. and from the world. And that's why I think that we need to unite all the efforts of all the countries that have been affected right now by drugs to eradicate this problem. And I think it's not appointing one country or accusing one country. I think that if we unite all these efforts, not only military efforts, I think that we need also to invest in social justice, in recover our economies, invest in the people, we are going to get rid of this problem of the face of the earth.
Now, what is the connection between the drug problem, the drug traffickers, the drug growers in your country, and the guerrillas?
Right now, I think that most of the finance of the guerrillas and the vigilantes, militias in Colombia are financed by drugs. So that's
they
why
need each other.
That's right. That's I said that is a convenience matrimony that they have right now. They take care of the plantations, they take taxes from the drug lords, taking care of the labs. So I think that if we attack direct narco-trafficking, we are going to avoid these rivers of money that are going to the insurgency or that are going to other actors of the conflict and the violence that we're living, not only Colombia, also in the United States and in other parts of the world.
What do you say to several U.S. congressmen who say, wait a minute, you cannot separate these. If we go in there and increase our aid and assistance to Colombia in the narco war, we are in fact also involving ourselves in the civil war?
That's why, Jim, we create what we call the Special Anti-Narcotics Battalion of the Army. That right now, police and army are involved in drug trafficking, against drug trafficking, and that's why we separate the aid to these anti-narcotic battalions that is going to work hand by hand with the police in eradicating drugs in Colombia, and all the aid, all the support of the United States is going to be to these special units that united with the government and with the society, we are going to fight narco-trafficking in the country, avoiding money that will be going to the army. That's why we are creating a special anti-narcotics unit, and we hope that by the end of the next 3 years, we could have between 4,000 to 5,000 specialized training men of the army and the police fighting together to eradicate drugs from our country.
No danger that the U.S. could get sucked into the other war?
That's why we're trying to split. These aid will go directly to these special units.
What about the critics like Congressman Burton we just saw on the tape, who accuses you of appeasement in the way you have dealt with these guerrillas by giving them a huge part of your country, etc.?
I control, and my government control, the whole territory of Colombia. But what is not fair is that I've been working for the peace process only 1 year. If you compare the peace process of Colombia with Northern Ireland or the Middle East, they've been centuries before sitting at the table of negotiations. In 1 year, I have with the FARC agreed on an agenda, 12-point agenda, and we hope very soon to start our negotiations with the FARC. Sometimes people are expecting soon that we could achieve peace in Colombia, and this is a difficult process. To achieve peace, you have to work, you have to build, you have to create the environment. We've been in this internal war for 40 years. And people are expecting 40 years. And people are expecting that in 8 months or 9 months, well, I'm been in government only for 1 year, and in the last 8 months, I think that we have advanced than more in 15 years. So I think that this is a good starting point, and we hope to get negotiations very soon.
As a practical matter, is a military solution even possible?
I agree with President Clinton. The problems of Colombia, you cannot solve the problems through a military solution. It's through a political solution that we're going to solve our problems.
But does the other side really want peace? Don't they really want to control part of their country? Don't they really want to continue?
As I see your report, they are controlling 30% of the country. What is happening is that they have presence in 30% of the country, but we have absolute control of the whole territory of Colombia. What we create with what we call the distension zone is a zone in which insurgency and government, journalists, members of the international community go there, or could be there, to start this negotiation process.
What are you doing about all these people who are fleeing your country?
The problem is that for the first time in the history of Colombia, as you said also in your report, we have a link between insecurity and economic crisis. Colombia has been our economy has been growing for the last 70 years, but for the first time we inherit an economic crisis. Unemployment right now in Colombia is 20%. That's why we think that if we enhance the commerce with the United States, new product of Colombia, new employment, we're going to have new employers in our country. And in that way, we are avoiding people going out of the country looking for new alternatives of a way of living. Because we have to be aware that many of the displaced people that we have right now in Colombia because causes of violence are not in Miami or in Washington or in Canada or in other Central American countries. They are in Colombia. And that's why we need to create new employment and put back the economy on track and growing.
How would you characterize the response you've received at the UN yesterday and here in Washington today to your message?
Excellent. I think
they're going to help you?
Yes. President Clinton was committed to help. Even today, Senator Coverdell and Senator DeWine, they propose a $1.5 billion for the next 3 years as help to Colombia. So I think that's a very good first step. But we also want them to ask international community to be involved and get involved in this program. Colombia is putting into this plan $4 billion. 40% of my budget of defense in Colombia is dedicated to drug trafficking. What we are asking is the world, not only the United States, why don't you help us? Or why don't we create this strategic alliance to fight drug trafficking and to end violence in my country with $3.25 billion in the next 3 years.
Well, Mr. President, thank you and good luck to you.
Thank you very much.
Still to come on the NewsHour tonight, a Millennium Bug update and candidate Buchanan. Our business correspondent Paul Salmon has the Millennium story.
As we near January 1st, a Senate panel today issued its 100-day report on the Y2K computer problem. Joining us to talk about the report are its authors, Robert Bennett, Republican of Utah and chairman of the Senate Special Committee on the problem, and Christopher Dodd, a Connecticut Democrat and the committee's vice chairman. Gentlemen, welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Senator Bennett, how reassured or worried should we be at this point?
Well, if you're thinking in terms of the vast national systems like the power grid, the telephone system, the banking system, and so on, I think you should be fairly well reassured. We are not going to have a major meltdown. On the other hand, that is no assurance that you're not going to have a problem in your backyard, because there are still parts of the system, parts of the economy that could feel a Y2K impact. So I say it's not going to roll across the country, but it may be just across your street.
Senator Dodd, what are you most worried about? What do you think we haven't done yet that we need to be doing, or that I should be worried about in my backyard?
Well, there's one area I think that Bob, Senator Bennett and I are probably most concerned about in terms of system-wide problems, and that is in the healthcare area. I think, as Bob has said, telecommunications, transportation, utilities, and the like are in very good shape. Federal agencies, Social Security, Medicare, the Defense Department, all in very good shape. But healthcare and the international scene, I think, are probably the two areas of most concern. In healthcare, there are some 800,000 physicians and 50,000 doctors' offices, 16,000 nursing homes, some 6,000 hospitals in the country. And in too many cases in our urban and rural hospitals, doctors' offices, we have very little assurance and very little information that these places have become compliant. In fact, there was a story today out of Massachusetts that indicates that 51% of the hospitals had not finished upgrading their biomedical devices. 48% had contingency or did not have contingency plans ready in the event of power lights to go out. So there still are areas in the healthcare area that are troubling. Medicaid, for one. There are too many states and too many of the systems on eligibility, management systems, and children's health, which are just not in good shape yet with 100 days to go.
Would you personally be worried if you were in a hospital? I'm not suggesting anything here, but on January 1st, I mean, or I was in a hospital, any of us? You know?
Well, I'd want to check. This is the kind of question, this is where consumers come in, where they can do an awful lot to as Bob Bennett has very accurately said, if you're going to stockpile anything, stockpile information, to quote to the chairman of the committee. And this is where good common sense by consumers, talking to their physicians, making sure, calling their hospital, and asking whether or not the equipment they've got is compliant. Many places it is. I don't want to suggest to you that this is all across the country, but there are too many places where there are too many unanswered questions, and too many of these systems do rely on computer systems that are going to operate accurately, and unfortunately we don't have that information, so we have to list it as an area of significant vulnerability.
Senator Bennett.
Come to Utah. Their health care is going to be just fine in Salt Lake. I've already checked it out.
All right, I'll be sure to make a note. But can I fly that day on my way to Utah? I read something that 47% or 41% of computer scientists weren't going to fly on January 1st?
Well, my guide there is if the airline is willing to put the airplane in the sky, they know better than I do. They have a greater vulnerability with all of the liability there and their own crew with their lives at risk. If they're willing to take that risk, I'm willing to take it with them. I'd be a little careful about destinations. There are some places in the world where I wouldn't fly. But interestingly, those airlines that serve many of those places have already announced they won't have an airplane in the sky that weekend. So if you're flying to an American destination or a Western European destination on a reliable carrier that's willing to take the risk, I think you should be willing to, too.
Our report, by the way, just on, I think there's 670 airports in the country, licensed airports. The only area of any concern that's relatively minor, I think, a landing light area, and they're already making the corrections there. So we're in very good shape on domestic flights, and what Bob said internationally is accurate.
Well, Senator Bennett, what about this international scene problem that Senator Dodd was referring to? In your report, you say you're worried about what happens in other countries and how it might affect us. Could you explain that?
Yeah, the thing that has come home to us all as we've gone through this experience is how interconnected the world is, or in tech language, how wired we all are. And as a result of that, if you have a problem in one part of the world that, frankly, you don't think about or whose name you can't even pronounce, it can turn up in the international supply chain. It can trip some kind of a tripwire in the process of providing raw materials or finished goods to something that is made someplace else and then incorporated someplace else. You know, the old line, for want of a nail, the shoe was lost, and so on, can apply here. Now, that's ameliorated somewhat by the fact that the major multinational corporations are all checking their suppliers. They understand this every bit as well as senators do, maybe better. And so they've gone 2, 3, 4 levels deep in checking their suppliers to make sure that they don't have a particular problem. But there's no question there are some countries where they're going to have difficulties, and inevitably some of those difficulties are going to spill over into the world chain of commerce.
Senator Dodd, when you were here in March, both of you were here, and you were telling us the problems at that time, you worried about this interruption of supply from abroad with respect to American pharmaceuticals specifically. Still worried?
I am a bit. Again, I think there's been a sort of a lackadaisical attitude in too many countries around the world about this issue, and in our view have not taken it as seriously as they should have. I've got to share with you here a story that came across the wires today. Indonesia's National Electricity Board was recently asked whether or not it was Y2K prepared. The reply is really a gem. The fellow said, "We can observe what happens at midnight 1999 in Western Samoa, New Zealand, and Australia, and still have 6 hours to make plans." And that sort of says it all. I mean, there are businesses and countries that have been working at this for a decade to get ready. And so if your attitude is we can sort of respond in 6 hours, you get some indication of the kinds of problems that could ensue.
Again, back in March, Senator Bennett, you said some people will panic, and the panic will end up being more disruptive than the Y2K problem would be. Still think that?
Well, I'm hoping that the issuance of this report will help alleviate that, because the only real antidote to panic or complacency, and frankly we're a little worried about that too, the only antidote is good information. Senator Dodd and I have tried to make sure that this committee would become the repository of accurate information about Y2K, and we think we've gone a long way in that direction with this report. So we say to anybody who's tending to panic, look it up. Look at the report. If the report doesn't answer it, go to our website, go to our hearings. All of this information is public. The administration has a website, and we think if people become properly informed, they will make intelligent contingency plans, and when you have a contingency plan, not one that you've cobbled together in 6 hours, you then don't tend to panic. You've got it under control.
Briefly, Senator Dodd, how do you respond to someone who's listening and says, hey, what else would the government say but that we shouldn't worry about these things? Why should we believe what we're hearing?
No, listen, if you listen to what Senator Bennett and I were saying a year ago, and talking about the information highway here, I think both of us would have said, based on what we knew a year ago, we were looking at a 50-car pileup. Today, I think our assessment would be, as far as our own country is concerned, maybe what we call the fender bender problem. It's been reduced substantially. The federal government has spent over $8 billion. Worldwide, over $600 billion have been spent to deal with this issue. And we believe we've come a long way to reducing the potential threat that this issue posed. But let me tell you the one thing I think that I would bring up in the closing minutes here that people can make a difference in their own lives on. There are scam artists out there who will take advantage of this situation, this Y2K problem, and call people and solicit bank information, credit card information, which they will then use to strip people of their resources, financially and otherwise. If people get unsolicited calls requesting that kind of information related to Y2K, they ought to hang up the phone or ask the people for their number, and so they'll call them back. But don't share that information by anyone who calls you under the guise of Y2K.
Well, thank you both, gentlemen, very much.
Thank you.
Finally tonight, Terrence Smith has the Buchanan story.
And let me quote
In the past few weeks, Republican presidential candidate Pat Buchanan has been making the rounds on the Sunday morning television talk shows, putting out the word that he may soon jump the GOP ship.
We are taking a hard look at leaving the Republican nomination run and running for the Reform Party nomination. The decision has not been made yet.
This is Pat Buchanan's third presidential run. In 1992, he ran a close second to then-President George Bush in New Hampshire, and later stole the spotlight at the Republican convention with a speech whose hardline conservatism surprised even some Republicans.
There is a religious war going on in this country. It is a cultural war as critical to the kind of nation we shall be as the Cold War itself.
Buchanan ran again in 1996 and beat Bob Dole in the New Hampshire primary. It was the high point of a campaign that fizzled in the later primaries. Now Buchanan is eyeing the nomination of the Reform Party, founded in 1992 and funded by billionaire Ross Perot. Perot so far has not publicly endorsed any candidate for the 2000 run. Privately, aides say he favors Buchanan. But the route to the nomination will not be smooth. The Reform Party's leading elected official, Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura, is hostile to both Buchanan's conservative views on social issues and to his potential candidacy.
Pat Buchanan, I don't believe is necessarily a good fit because Pat Buchanan puts social issues on the front burner.
Ventura reportedly has been contacting possible alternatives, including the actor Warren Beatty, former Connecticut Senator Lowell Weicker, and more recently, real estate tycoon Donald Trump. Buchanan's flirtation with the Reform Party has coincided with the furor caused by his controversial new book, A Republic, Not an Empire. In the book, Buchanan analyzes the U.S. role in foreign affairs and takes some typically incendiary positions. He questions, for example, whether Hitler ever intended to attack the United States, writing, "After the Royal Air Force won the Battle of Britain, the German invasion threat was history." Buchanan also repeats earlier criticisms of the pro-Israel lobby, writing, "After World War II, Jewish influence over foreign policy became almost an obsession with American leaders." The book has revived questions within the media about whether Buchanan's views approach anti-Semitism. He was questioned this week on CNN's Crossfire by Republican host Mary Matalin.
What do you think it is about either your presentation or what you produce in print that raises these accusations, as has been the case day after day, show after show, that these charges of anti-Semitism and racism?
Well, first let me say, look, there's not a trace of bigotry in that book, and there's not a trace of bigotry in my heart toward any individual or group of individuals. Pat Buchanan all of a sudden may break through and get a Reform nomination and be president. Now good old Pat, oh my goodness, and all this garbage and stuff like that's thrown at you. The idea is to smear me and stop me and tell the Reform Party people, you can't take him, you can't take him.
Buchanan's views have him once again front and center in the national news. He concedes that he courts the attention.
Well, I benefit from the fact that I am controversial, and I do have a very high name recognition for good or ill. and I take controversial stands.
It's that high name recognition that could make him an attractive candidate for the rank and file of the Reform Party. Buchanan has said he will decide by October 15 whether to run for the Reform nomination and for the estimated $13 million in federal matching funds that comes with it.
For more on the Buchanan saga, we're joined by three veteran political journalists. Thomas Edsall of The Washington Post, Elizabeth Arnold of National Public Radio, and Ron Brownstein of the Los Angeles Times. Welcome to you all. Tom Edsall, let me begin with you and explain to us why Republican Pat Buchanan is, or may be, running for the Reform Party nomination.
Pat Buchanan, for 2 elections, was able to be Mr. Conservative. He was the guy who challenged Bush first, almost, caused a lot of problems and really caused his defeat, you could argue. He did the same thing to Dole, and he was the center of attention. In this election, he has really faded. He's competing with about 3 or 4 others, Steve Forbes, Gary Bauer, Alan Keyes, Dan Quayle, all for the same conservative mantle. He's not doing well. The Reform Party offers him a chance to get into the general election as a full-fledged candidate, to be in the debates possibly, to have $12.6 million, which he's never seen before. And he would be facing 2 candidates where he would be the one opposed to the 2 of them on trade, immigration. He would be the one polarizing the event. This is just the kind of, this guy loves to be in the fight, and this would put him right in the fight.
Ron Brownstein, if that's the logic of it, what are the prospects? What are his chances of getting the Reform Party nomination?
Well, handicapping the Reform Party presidential primary is a little bit of a daunting task, because the Reform Party itself is kind of a permanent floating crap game. What it is at any given moment is not what it was necessarily 6 months ago. But with that caveat, I'd say that Buchanan begins with 2 principal problems and 3 principal assets in doing this. The problems are that on some issues, he is simply not a good fit for the party. It is silent in its platform on social issues, and many of its leading figures tend to be pro-choice. He is, of course, staunchly anti-abortion. Secondly, he has Jesse Ventura, as your piece mentioned, the leading elected official in the party, sort of searching for a tag team partner, somebody to go into the ring against Pat Buchanan. Warren Beatty has already said no, he's not going to run for the Reform Party nomination. Donald Trump and Lowell Weicker are the livest possibilities he has at this moment. It's not clear whether either of them will get in either. The assets Buchanan have are also formidable, though. As you mentioned, Ross Perot, through his running mate in 1996, Pat Choate, his running mate, Pat Choate is actively supporting Buchanan. Many read that as a sign that Perot wants him in. Secondly, Buchanan's economic nationalism message, his protectionist message on trade, I think is broadly in tune with the party, certainly where Perot and Choate took it in 96. Finally, the rules of this, rather Byzantine rules of this election process for the Reform Party nomination benefit a candidate like Buchanan. The electorate is an amorphous concept in the Reform Party. Anybody who asks for a ballot in 2000 will be allowed to vote in their, quote, primary. That means a candidate like Buchanan, who has an existing mailing list of 250,000 or so names, has a great advantage, because he can simply mail to all of his supporters, many of whom may not go with him because they're Republicans, but many of whom might. They can then request ballot. He can, in effect, stuff the ballot very legally, and that puts a lot of pressure on anyone who wants to run against him.
Elizabeth Arnold, what do you think? Is there a logic here, and does it make sense from the way you see it?
Well, I think it's sort of hard to assess what the Reform Party really is. As Ron was pointing out, it sort of gives new meaning to the phrase big tent. When you think about the candidates that they're all talking about, Ralph Nader, Lowell Weicker, Donald Trump, Pat Buchanan, think about the differences between Pat Buchanan and the party's highest elected official, Jesse Ventura. Pat Buchanan opposes abortion, opposes gay rights, opposes free trade, opposes immigration. Ventura is for abortion, he's for gay rights, he's for free trade, he's for legalization of marijuana, legalization of prostitution. Put that up against Pat Buchanan's moral crusade of the last 2 election cycles, and you kind of wonder, what is this party really about? And at this point, it's really more about personalities than it is about a set of issues, and so that they're embracing Pat Buchanan.
Well, let me ask Tom Edsall. I suppose that the Reform Party has some concerns here too. It wants to do well and preserve its matching funds.
Well, the main thing that Reform Party people want is to get to the next election with more money flowing, and to do that, they have to get at least 5% of the vote. That's one of the appeals that Buchanan has, that he would break that margin, whereas Trump or Weicker, that's a big if. Jesse Ventura wants to have a lot of money, as much as you can have, in the pile there, so that if he decides to run 5 years from now, he will be well financed in that bid.
So perversely, he actually has an interest in it.
Actually, I think he's got more interest in Buchanan than he does from his own personal point of view. Plus, the Reform Party, as both Elizabeth and Ron are saying, it really is a vehicle. It's not a party. It's like a car. Who drives it is just who's got the keys and turns
Ron,
the engine.
if in fact he does run for and obtain the Reform Party nomination, will that make him a major player in the general election?
Well, I think he'll be a player because he will have $12.5 million. He could be in the debates. He is a very effective campaigner. The underlying climate, though, I think, is less conducive to a third-party challenge than it was when Perot first ran in '92. Then you had higher unemployment. You had a very high percentage of Americans saying they thought the country was going off in the wrong direction. Now you have a lot more economic satisfaction, a lot more general satisfaction. It's going to be, I think, harder to make the case that we need something outside the two-party system. It may be hard for him to go very beyond what Perot did in '96, which is about half of what he did in '92, which is where Buchanan is polling now. But even that could tilt the balance in the Electoral College, especially in a number of southern and mountain states that Democrats would have trouble competing in a two-way race. If you bring down the margin you need to win because a third-party candidate is pulling away some of those votes, they come back into reach potentially for Democrats.
Would that make sense to you, Elizabeth? Would it hurt perhaps a Republican candidate more than a Democrat?
That's the conventional wisdom, that is, if he runs as a social conservative, that hurts the Republican candidate. If he runs in the other direction and preaches economic nationalism, which is what he's done very successfully in the last two elections, that hurts the Democrat. But as Ron pointed out, I think it's really important. This election cycle is very different. People are telling pollsters that they don't want change and they're not looking for more choices. I was with Buchanan in Michigan last month, and he used to get all these folks, unemployed auto workers who were anti-NAFTA, and they would have huge rallies. Well, those guys didn't turn out for some of these rallies because they're all employed now. So the situation's really different in terms of his base, and his base in the Republican Party is shrinking, and I think his base among Reagan Democrats has shrinked as well.
Tom Edsall, what about the statements he's made in his book and on these talk shows recently, the controversy around them? Has that made it a more difficult sell for the Reform Party or Pat Buchanan himself?
He has created a real problem for himself with this argument that the United States should have stayed out of World War II at least through 1941 and on into 1942 and perhaps through the whole thing. That is just not an argument that's going to sell. It's a complex argument he's developed in this book, but you can't make complex arguments in political campaigns. He was on for an hour on a show today, and the whole show was really about this. And you started getting veterans on these shows, and they don't like it.
And they're not happy, I'm sure. Ron Brownstein, would you think that this would have an effect on him? And a related question, does the press go easy on Pat Buchanan? That allegation has been made, that if another candidate said anything like that, a George W. Bush or an Al Gore, he'd really feel the fire.
I think the answer is yes, but not necessarily because Buchanan is part or has been part of the press. I think we almost have parallel presidential races developing, Terry. We have candidates who we think might actually be president, that we hold to one set of standards and who we scrutinize very carefully. Then we have the field being increasingly cluttered with lots of people who are using this as a vehicle to project their views and to use it as a platform to make their case to the American people, but that very few people believe are going to actually ever be president. And those are sort of let slide in a way. I mean, we're not examining them in the same respect or dealing with their comments with the same level of gravity. This is a classic case. Pat Buchanan did not need to reopen the issue of whether Charles Lindbergh should be rehabilitated in 2000. This is not really a pressing issue for many Americans. Was Lindbergh right in saying that America should have stayed out of World War II? He's opened a problem for himself, as Tom said, but not as great a problem as it would have been if someone like George Bush or Al Gore had said it, because we are simply not applying the same standards to the candidates for whom there's sort of an informal consensus that, look, this guy is really not going to be president, and in all likelihood.
Okay, thank you. Ron, Elizabeth, Tom, thanks very much.
Again, the major stories of this Wednesday. The Justice Department sued the tobacco industry to recover billions in federal funds spent on 6 smokers. A lawyer for Philip Morris said the suit was without substance and was politically motivated. And Senators Bennett and Dodd said on the NewsHour U.S. computer systems were ready for the new century, but some significant local glitches might occur. To follow up on our report last night about the Defense Department's School of the Americas, a House-Senate Conference Committee agreed today to continue funding the school's training program. And before we go tonight, a reminder that Hedrick Smith's documentary on how some communities fight crime will be shown on most public television stations later this evening. We ran an excerpt on the NewsHour last night. It's called Solutions. Please check your local listings for the exact time tonight. We'll see you online and again here tomorrow evening. I'm Jim Lehrer. Thank you and good night.
Modern practices have made American farmers the world's most productive. Who helps put the people who grow the food in touch with those who need it?
And by Solomon Smith Barney.
Are microfibers just a trend? One thing's for sure, opportunities abound. Solomon Smith Barney. Success is earned.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you. Video cassettes of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer are available from PBS Video. Call 1-800-328-PBS-1.
This is PBS.
Two Portland high school students pull a string of armed robberies, making national headlines. What did it teach us about Measure 11's minimum sentencing law? Did it take a bite out of crime or open a Pandora's box of plea bargaining and prison construction?
It's lived up to its potential on a Get Tough on Crime measure. The question is, at what cost?
We'll find out on Measure 11, Hard Choices, Hard Time. Coming up next, here on OPB.
You know, and you to ride.
When poets gather, it's the music of metaphor, the power of rhyme.
Africa, go back, black, see yourself, know yourself.
I'm never going to sleep with Martin Amis or anyone famous.
Poems reach up like spindrift.
One good turn deserves a bird in the hand.
Fooling with Words with Bill Moyers.
On OPB, Sunday at 9.
Behind the dark shadow of the Iron Curtain, they bowed to the will of their nation. Insiders unlocked the secrets hidden by generations of espionage. Hear from the spies, the athletes, and the man who reached for the stars. What secrets will be revealed when you open the Red Files?
On OPB, Monday at 9.
Today, you have become teachers. In your hands is our nation's most precious resource, our future. Yet before you can teach a single lesson, you will have to accomplish something far more difficult. You will have to inspire. It is not enough simply to make someone learn. You must make them...
There's only one place to choose from the complete selection of award-winning minivans. Your Chrysler and Plymouth dealer. Get $1,000 to $1,250 cash allowance or 1.9 APR on Chrysler and Plymouth minivans.
See your local Northwest Chrysler and Plymouth dealer.
99.5 KWJJ with 50 minutes of music an hour.